just a listening practice session. Tonight, we're challenging your focus with a story so terrifying you might just forget to breathe. This is the Smiling Man of Route 66. But before we dive into the deep end, I have a few instructions to maximize your experience and your fear. First, if you haven't done so already, I need you to lock your door and make sure the windows are closed tight. Next, get those headphones securely in your ears. We don't want any outside distractions. Third, kill the lights. Go ahead. Total darkness, and pull your blanket up right over your chin. You'll want the shield. Now, listen closely to my final warning. This is not just a story. It's an immersion. No matter what sounds you hear, no matter how close they seem, and no matter how much your heart is pounding, do not take those earphones out. Ready? Let the fear begin. It was 2:15 a.m. on the 4th of July weekend. The legendary Route 66 stretched out like a black snake through the Nevada desert, swallowed by an endless, suffocating darkness. The only light for miles came from the twin beams of David's 1969 Ford Mustang cutting through the dusty air. David was tired. His eyes burned from staring at the yellow divider lines for 6 hours straight. He turned up the radio, hoping for some classic rock to keep him awake. But all he got was static white noise. Hiss, crackle, hiss. Suddenly, the low fuel light flickered on his dashboard. Great, David muttered, his voice sounding too loud in the empty car. Just great. According to his GPS, the nearest gas station was 5 miles ahead. It was a place called Lou's Lonely Stop. As he pulled into the station, a shiver ran down his spine. The place looked abandoned. One flickering neon light buzzed overhead, ZZCCT casting long, dancing shadows on the cracked pavement. The wind howled through the dry desert bushes, sounding almost like a human whistle. David stepped out of the car. The silence was heavy, oppressive. He swiped his card and lifted the nozzle. That's when he felt it, the feeling of being watched. He looked across the 2-lane highway. Standing in the darkness, just at the edge of the light cast by a street lamp, was a silhouette. It was a man, a very tall man. Part 2, the dance. The man was wearing a dirty, old-fashioned gray suit that looked 2 sizes too big for him. But it wasn't his clothes that made David's blood run cold. It was his posture. The man was leaning back at an impossible angle, staring up at the moonless sky. Then the man's head snapped down. He looked straight at David. Even from 50 yards away, David could see the smile. It was wide, impossibly wide. It stretched from ear to ear, revealing too many teeth. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, glowing faintly in the dark. Is everything okay? David called out, his voice trembling. The man didn't speak. Instead, he took a step. It wasn't a walk. It was a strange, jerky movement. He lifted his knee high, almost to his chest, and stomped down. Then the other leg. He was dancing, a silent, grotesque waltz towards David. David's heart hammered against his ribs. Pump was ticking too slowly. Click, click, click. He looked back. The man was closer now, much closer. He wasn't just dancing anymore. He was moving with supernatural speed, yet his body remained stiff and that frozen, wide grin never left his face. David panicked. He ripped the nozzle out, gas spilling over his shoes, and threw it on the ground. He jumped into the driver's seat and locked the doors. Thump. David screamed. The smiling man was right there. His face was pressed against the driver's side window. The glass fogged up from his breath. He wasn't looking at David, he was looking through him. And then, for the first time, he made a sound. It wasn't a voice. It was a high-pitched, mechanical screech like metal grinding on metal. Part 3, the chase. David slammed his foot on the gas pedal. Tires screeched, kicking up gravel as the Mustang roared back onto the highway. He didn't look back until he hit 80 miles per hour. When he finally checked the rearview mirror, the road behind him was empty. Just darkness. You're losing your mind, Dave. Just tired, he whispered to himself, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He drove for another 10 minutes, his breathing finally slowing down. He reached for the radio dial to turn off the static. Suddenly, the static stopped. A voice cut through the speakers. It wasn't a radio DJ. It sounded wet and distorted. David froze. Car was freezing cold. You forgot to pay. Bam! Something heavy landed on the roof of the car. The metal buckled under the weight. David screamed and swerved the car left and right. Above him, he heard the sound of long, sharp fingernails scratching against the metal roof. Scritch, scratch, scritch. Then a head swung down over the windshield, upside down, staring into the car. It was him, the smiling man. Even at 90 miles per hour, he held on effortlessly. He tapped on the windshield glass with a long, pale finger dot, tap, dot, tap, dot, tap. His lips moved, mouthing the words, "Let me in." David slammed on the brakes. The car spun out of control, sliding off the road and crashing into a ditch. Dust and smoke filled the air. David groaned, his head spinning. He looked at the windshield. The man was gone. Part 4, the motel room. David scrambled out of the wrecked car and ran. He saw the lights of a motel in the distance, the dessert inn. He burst into the lobby, terrifying the elderly woman at the desk. "Call the police, please. Someone is chasing me," David yelled, gasping for air. The woman, looking concerned, handed him a key. "Room 4, honey. Lock the door. I'm calling the sheriff right now." David ran to room 4, slammed the door, bolted the lock, and fastened the chain. He dragged a heavy dresser in front of the door. He collapsed on the bed, burying his face in his hands. "It's over," he sobbed. "I'm safe." 5 minutes passed. Then a knock on the door, dot, knock, dot, knock, dot, knock. It was a polite, rhythmic knock. "David, this is Sheriff Miller." A deep, authoritative voice came from outside. "Open up, son. The lady at the desk told me everything. You're safe now." David felt a wave of relief wash over him. Thank God. He stood up and walked to the door. He moved the dresser aside and reached for the chain. But something stopped him. He looked down at the gap between the door and the floor. The light from the hallway showed the shadow of the person standing outside. The shadow didn't look like a policeman. The arms of the shadow were abnormally long, hanging down to the ankles. And the feet were facing backward. David backed away, his blood turning to ice. "David." The voice outside changed. It was no longer deep. It glitched, shifting into that familiar, high-pitched mechanical screech. "Open the door, David. I want to show you something." The doorknob began to turn slowly. The wood of the door groaned as something incredibly strong pushed against it. The lock started to bend. David's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with trembling hands. It was a text message from an unknown number. He opened it. The message read, "I lied. I'm not outside the door anymore. Look up." David slowly looked up at the air vent in the ceiling right above his head. The screws were missing. From the darkness of the vent, a wide, pale face with an impossible smile was looking down at him. "Peekaboo, this is where the recording ends. Now, tell me, did you hear that noise? Is it coming from your closet, or is it under your bed?"